Buenos dias, Gunners Collective TV. Back at it, you already know. Like a torta with some bad habits. Bye up, bye up. Let's get to the intro. Welcome back to the channel, and if you haven't already hit that like and subscribe button, make sure you go ahead and do that. Put your notification bell on all so that way you're directed in the direction of the dope content that I stay kicking, and I appreciate your support, man. I'm very humbled by it. So the year was 1996, and I just paroled from the California Youth Authority, right? And I'm not going to lie to you guys, I was on demon time. That's how those kids like to say it nowadays, demon time, right? My mind was made up. Fuck parole, I'm a soldier, right? My mentality and the Northern cause was ingrained into it, right? And my mentality out there was kill or be killed. I had an image to uphold. I had a status to uphold. I felt like because I did time among some killers and some hitters that I was that, okay? And I'm not going to lie, the welcoming was like I was a king or something. The welcoming was everybody was happy that I was out. All the haters weren't hating no more. Like it was more of a restart, right? But I still had a lot of the same old ways of thinking. My ways of thinking were I wanted to fight, and I wanted to continue to prove myself not only to others, but more so to me and to the cause that I was fighting for, right? But there was a lot going on in the town at that time. There was a war quietly and secretly being fought that I didn't realize I was going to get thrown into the mix with, right? And a lot of things were going to happen. And one of the things that was going to happen was I was going to be shot in the head to one of the enemies, right? One of the enemies was going to catch me slipping. And I've told that story before, but I'm going to let you guys know about a war that's been quietly and secretly fought in Northern California, at least in my section, my area, for decades. And that's the war between the Crips and the Nortenos, right? Now, in Southern California, this is a war that's been going on for decades as well, even longer. But it's more along the racial lines of black and brown. In Southern California, there's always going to be that stigma that black and brown don't get along, that black and brown are racially divided. And I've seen it. You know, I've been incarcerated in many places where I've seen Southsiders and brothers, man, dislike each other just based upon either gangs or groups or color, pigmentation. There's a lot of different reasonings behind it. And the cultures just didn't identify with each other. So there was always that stigma that Southerners hated blacks and blacks disliked them as well, right? We utilized that as Norteños to bring the blacks into the fold, to become sympathizers to their cause and them sympathizers to ours. We started groups such as the CXIVers back in the days, the Crip 14ers, which was comprised of mostly Crips from Northern California, the Stockton, Modesto, Merced areas, Sacramento. They came into the fold because we had a common enemy. Okay, so at that time when CXIV was popping off, there is still some dedicated CXIVers to this day. Now, it wasn't limited to Northern California. There were CXIVers in Southern California as well. But you had to have gone through the system. You had to have gone through them wars. You had to have gone through them dislikes, them mean mugs, and them shoulder shrugs to understand exactly why the Crips decided to identify with the North and were doing what they were doing. Okay, but that is not the end of the story. See, the war that's been quietly fought, and in 1996, when I got out and got thrown into the mix, was the war between the Crips and the Norteños. And it even continues to this day. Now, it's not every Northern California city. There are some cities where they're cool with the brothers, man. There are some cities where the Crips and the Northerners get along and might even function hand in hand, side by side. I know in Sacramento, you had the Garden Block Crips and Barrio Gardons. They actually shared a neighborhood, right? In Merced, we shared neighborhoods, but we didn't like sharing, right? When I got out, a homeboy pulls me to the side because my whole get down was to try to cease red on red in the city. I had been locked up with some good ass homeboys, right? From the other side, which was north side. We were from the west side, and the Northerners on the north side, and Loft Bro and these RBL cats and all these different gangs that were in Merced. We were beefing. There was a lot of red on red going on. This was prior to 97. When red on red activities were supposed to cease. Now, they've never ceased fully, but they were supposed to, and you can get in big trouble if you're incarcerated with that on your jacket, right? but that is what it is. You can't tell someone to put the gun down if they don't want to put the gun down. But at the same time, I get pulled to the side, and one of my homeboys sees that that's my mentality. I'm trying to preach cease red on red. I'm trying to preach the Northern cause. I'm trying to preach the eradication of Southsiders in our area because they were moving in and planting flags all around us. And I seen it before it got there. I already knew what was coming. Having been locked up in Fred C. Nellis down south of Southern California, I knew the way real Sureños and Southsiders moved. They start getting deeper and deeper and deeper. And their mentality has always been, even if there's one of them, that's their yard. They are in possession of that yard. They'll plant their flag and they'll continue to bring busloads of them until eventually they'll eradicate whatever opposition is on that yard. And they can do that now in the California system at any time. The Southsiders and Southerners are so deep that if they choose to get all the Nortenos off that yard, it doesn't mean the Nortenos are not going to fight back and there's not going to be a serious war, but they have the manpower, the soldados, to do that anytime they want. And Norteños and people on that yard like Crips and Bloods and everyone else that's involved in the mix are keenly aware of the numbers game and how them dudes move. So that was just that. Now, my homeboy pulls me to the side and he says, hey, we have a bigger problem. We have a problem with the Crips. At that time, it was the Merced Gangster Crips. Now, what had happened was there was a discrepancy at a party, okay? Prior to me getting locked up in the Youth Authority, the Merced Gangster Crips were never a factor as far as a beef, right? I'm not going to say they weren't a factor as far as putting in work and doing their thing. The Crippin' and the Bloodin' wasn't too major. It was more a Norteño town, and that was that. The Asians had their little thing going on, and so be it, right? Prior to me getting locked up, it was like only if we went to Atwater or Livingston or Modesto or something did we have issues, right? But there really wasn't no issues in the city because everybody were Norteños. Everybody kind of just got along until they didn't. Sometime in between my incarceration and the time I got out, that's when a lot of the red on red started to unfold because of fucking personal issues. That's when this beef started with the Merced Gangster Crips over a chick at a party. A chick is the root of all evil. Women earmuff it, because I'm telling you right now, usually I've seen dynasties fall over pussy and power, right? And power equates to money, and that's just what it is. But at the same time, a woman with that snappy nappy is going to be way more dangerous than anything. So they get into an argument, some Norteños from a gang called M Street with the Merced Gangster Crips. Somehow there was a couple of Norteños from my neighborhood that were there that backed up the M Streeters. And that's exactly how that unfolded between the Merced Gangster Crips and the Northerners. I did my research and my history. Didn't even know why we were fighting the Crips for years. Had to go back into the archives and figure it out from some people that were actually there when it happened, because I was locked up. So, of course, my mentality was, well, I wasn't down with this because I grew up black and brown. I grew up hand in hand with the brothers, man. I grew up going to the same welfare department, getting the same food stamps. I grew up going to school with them. I grew up understanding that they were going through impoverished situations just like we were. They were going through poverty simultaneously with the brown community, right? So there was never no real big issues. So it wasn't a black and brown thing. And I had to be made aware of that by my homeboys. It wasn't we just were targeting blacks or they were targeting us because of our skin, right? Or because of our culture. No, it was more so a gang thing. It was the Crips that were in Merced, California at that point in time and throughout the certain cities in Northern California that had an issue with Norteños, right? They had an issue because, of course, in Northern California, Mexicans are overwhelmingly the majority in population. And the brothers, man, once they get a foothold, once they start selling their dope and doing their thing, man, they want to establish. They're not going to let no Mexicans tell them what they can and can't do and what neighborhood they can and can't cruise through, right? That's just how that goes. So there was a big conflict. There was a lot of issues. Now, after getting out in 1996, man, I was at a park. For those of you that don't know my story, I was at a park. It was me and another homeboy. We went there to meet up with two chicks. I was sitting at a bench, one of them wooden benches. I was actually sitting on the table talking to a chick. She was facing towards the street. I was facing her. My homeboy was over there kissing on some chick by a tree, trying to stay in the cut so he can get his finger wet. He was doing his thing. I was doing my thing. When two Crips were cruising by and happened to see and identify me as someone who had put in some work on them. Now, I'm going to say this. It was misidentification. Not that I wouldn't have put in work. If I had the air and the opportunity, I would have been opportunistic. That's a fact. At that time, that's what it was. We weren't getting along with the Crips. And we already knew it was on site with them and it was on site with us. And you would trip out because such a small city, such a small little town, right? We really never ran into each other. There was actually a couple of Merced Gangster Crips that I got along with, that I went to school with. I knew since we were in diapers, right? That were my homies. And they actually were giving us the heads up, like, hey, our homies are over here. They're going to try to put in some work over there. And it just wasn't, for us, we didn't figure it was more of enough of a factor to pose a threat to us. We figured out there was a few dudes that want to put in a little work. If we see them, we're going to shoot them. That's how we felt. I'm not saying we did that. That just was our mentality. So a couple of incidences happened that actually had us put the red light on them for a minute. So I end up getting shot in the head by this Crip, right? He gets out the car. He sees me at a Mongolian at the time. That's how he identified me. All I seen was, the last thing I remember was the chick's eyes, like, because she seen him coming. And then I woke up in the hospital. I got shot, right? The Crip is right there. He was shot as well. My homeboy shot him. He was next door to me in the hospital. They just had, that thin sheet between us. I don't know why they decided to put him in the hospital with me, right in the same room, but he was my bunkie. And he explained the situation, apologized profusely for being, catching the wrong guy. And I accepted that apology with the understanding that that doesn't mean when we get up out of here, if we see each other in traffic, because of who you are and who I am, it's not going to be smoke. It's just, I understand. I'm part of that life, and I understand, hey, mistakes happen. Okay. That didn't mean I didn't have a headache. Okay. I had a pounding headache. That was that. Getting out, my homeboys were furious. They wanted to go all in, full attack mode, offensively on the Crips, right? And I was able to let them know, hey, bro, this is what really went down. It wasn't a Crip North issue. It wasn't none of that. It was, but it wasn't. Okay. And I explained it. So around that same time, there was an issue that happened with the Merced Gangster Crips, where we kind of like took a step back. See, there was a lot of war going on. There was war because there was an Asian gang at the time called True Blues, who were Crips, right? And they were kind of a mixed gang. There was Asians, there was whites, there was blacks, and there was one particular black dude who liked to push the envelope in the issue. And he was an issue, man. He was a problem. He was a problem. And he knew the only way to defeat the Nortenos, or to become a situation that it was going to be hard for us to handle, was he needed to bring in another group in the fold. And he went to A-Town and started to hang around with the Southsiders in Atwater, who are our enemies right off the top, and got them to embrace him and his gang and his group. And so it was kind of like, for a while, us versus the True Blues, as well as the Merced Gangster Crips. So there was a lot of black and brown issues, as well as now the Asian Crips, him being a brother man. And it just, in my mind, it was like, okay, I didn't know that Crips and Nortenos were at odds as bad as we are. But it became an issue where we weren't even focused on the Southerners until they came into the fold with them. Okay, so that happened for a while. About the same time that happened, there was a police officer that was murdered in Merced. And it became a big issue, made national news, Officer Gray. And the suspect who was arrested for it was a guy named Tal Rivera Bullet from Merced. And there's a whole long story I don't even want to get into. I've told the story in the past, but I don't feel like getting into it right now, behind why that officer was actually killed. I know they like to give him his respect. They named a highway after him, and they got all this love for him. They want people to believe that he was just an upstanding citizen that cared about everybody and anything. But I could tell you, first and foremost, having willings and dealings with that officer, that he had a whole different agenda when it came to gang members and to anyone else. And it wasn't like, well, gang members ain't got shit coming. No, he had a different agenda. And I'm not going to say he was justifiably shot and murdered, but he was shot and murdered for a reason. Okay, so Tal Rivera Bullet he was actually a Mexican Crip from a black gang, right? When that happened, the shift in the focus shifted from the gang task and the cops in the town going after Nortenos, and, vigorously too. They were snatching us up, giving us gang cards, anywhere they seen us, harassing us, whatever. They started focusing on the Merced Gangster Crips, to the point where there was an article put out in the Merced Sun-Star that read, the Merced Gangster Crip gang is on life support in the city of Merced. They were really targeting them. I remember one day we were in my homeboy's front. We were out in the front, out on the street, right in our neighborhood. And his father was ex-military, right? Or, he was in the military. And he owned his home and whatever. And he didn't like that his son was a gang member and everything. Didn't condone it, but knew that it was past the point of return. Looked out for us. We were all in the front. The cops hit like 3 task force. He said, get in my yard. Get in my yard. So we jumped in his yard. Cops came, hey, we need to talk to these guys. He said, hey, this is private property. Leave these kids alone. We were youngsters, right? We were kids. We were an 18, 19, 20-year-old. Leave these kids alone. The cops like, hey, we ain't got no issue with them. We just want to let them know that if something was to ever happen to the Merced Gangster Crips, right, it is what it is. Basically giving us a green light to do what we wanted to do. We were going to do that anyways if we had an issue. But literally they were telling us, hey, it's hands-off policy. You guys do what you want. We don't give a shit. Because they felt some type of way about this Crip being convicted for the murder of one of their fellow officers, right? That's how petty it got. But you got to understand the streets and understand that, you know, the police officers at that point were just as, it seemed like, gang-related as we were. They knew the streets well. So this is a war, and that shifted where we were like, okay, we're not going to do the cops' work for them. We're not even going to trip off the Merced Gangster Crips. That ain't happening. Well, around that time, they were able to start accumulating numbers back. They had a few dudes that had got out the feds that really were about that business. They had a different mentality coming out the feds, coming out the state prison system. And in fact, one of the dudes who I grew up with, his brother was like a shot caller for them. And they wanted to go on the offensive. So they started to get off. You know what I'm saying? Late 90s, they started to get off on us, man. We started to see that these guys were actually a factor and an issue. So we started to retaliate. So when I hear this myth about, you know, the Nortenos and all the brothers, man, get along up north, I'm here to tell you, man, for the most part, it is true. A lot of cities, especially in the Bay Area, and you got to understand the Bay Area, it's not Crips, it's not Bloods. You do have a few, like in Richmond, you have Asian Crips, and you have some Bloods out there in Pittsburgh. In certain areas, you know, there's going to be some, a little bit of something everywhere. There's going to be a little bit about a lot of it everywhere. But for the majority in the Bay, it's just Bay brothers, right? Comies and Jamas and just Bay cats. And they do get along with the Northerners. There are personal issues. Now, I'll explain this to you, right? I had a partner, man, was a Merced Gangster Crip. I used to be with his sister. Man, I'll never forget. Her name was Lavanya, right? Lavanya, I used to call her my lasagna, right? Lavanya was bad, right? And a light-skinned chick, just fine as hell. And I used to be fucking with her, right? And her brother was a straight-up Merced Gangster Crip. And I remember the first time he see me, he knew who I was, and I knew who he was. And he was like, fuck you doing in my house? And I was like, he had a strap, and I was like, oh, hell no, right? All I had was a Magnum condom. I was like, God damn. Try to whip it out on him. Like, that's all I got, right? He was like, fuck you doing? His sister was like, nah, this is my man or whatever, right? I was for a couple of nights. And so he was like, look, bro, you ain't telling my peoples. I ain't tripping off your peoples. It ain't like that. We got to conversing, man, and talking a lot about what was going on. And it was like stupid because I grew up with this brother, man. I grew up going to school with the brothers, man. Like, I didn't understand why this beef started, right? Why it was so heavy. And I started to dislike it because to me, at that time, I was super active. I remember how the Southerners and the Crips and the Bloods and all that used to go at it in Southern California, right? While I was incarcerated. And I remember, like, it was very racial. And people could say whatever they want. Maybe it wasn't like that in prison, but in the youth authority, it was very racially motivated. Okay, and I heard a lot of disrespect on both sides towards Mexicans and blacks. And I didn't identify with that because I didn't grow up that way. That's not the way my gang mentality was. I was a street gang member, man, incarcerated and going to do what I had to do for my cause. But I didn't dislike someone because of their color or because of their culture. I think all cultures are beautiful. That's just me, right? So as we're getting in a talk, we ended up becoming friends. So he would give me the little heads up like, hey, bro, this, and that, this, and that. Well, there was an incident that happened, right? So I remember that night we went out to a place called Denair. And I'm not saying anything that everyone doesn't know and people are not locked up for. It just happened, right? And it's way past the statute of limitations. So we went to Denair to a party. So one of my homeboys was fucking with this white chick, right? Which we called the Aggie. She was the Aggie because back then, see, in the Central Valley, we have different, every different place has different wordings and different names for people. And the Aggies were like cowboys, right? So anyways, he was dating this chick. She invited us to a party. We slid out there, right? The last time we had slid out to Denair for a party, we went fucking straight King Kong on them, took their kegs and did our thing. That was the way we did it. We just deboed everyone. But we were actually going to go because this was his lady to chill out there. So we were chilling. The Merced Gangster Crips pulled up. I don't know who invited them, how they got there, man. And it was on and cracking. It was on site. And I remember my boy was there. And I remember looking at him as I'm fucking fighting with one of his friends. And he came from the side and knocked his boy out. And I looked shocked, right? And in the midst of all this going on, people were fucking kicking in the door of the house, trying to race into the house to run because there was a lot of innocent people, civilians that weren't involved. And the cops were called and people got locked up. I got locked up for a couple nights and released, right? And this is just what happened. Now, I go back to that chick's house and I hadn't fucked with that chick for a minute. And she sees me. She's like, damn, you want a mama? Yeah, hell yeah. And then I see her brother, and I'm like, bro, what happened? And he was like, man, he's all beat up. He's like, my homeboys done messed me up, man. I told him, man, that you was family, right? And they weren't going for that. So there are instances where people will have personal relationships. So, but it is a war that is being fought. You know, when I hear all these people make videos about, oh, you know, black and brown in Northern California, man, they don't beef at all. Yeah. In some cities they do. And it's a war that's been fought in my city, like I said, quietly for 30 plus years, man. In fact, right now, as we're talking today, right, there's a situation where it's the Crips and the Southsiders versus the North and the Bloods, right? And it's like that, you know. Gangs are gangs, but you know what's crazy is this: just like, you know, you hear about the Southerners or the Northern. Well, we know that all Northerners, once they get into prison, they function as one unit, right? The odd man is going to get left out, but they function as one unit. They're all together, no matter if you're from Sacra, San Jose, Salas, Tulare County, Merced, Modesto, and every city in between. The meantime, in between time, Turlock, shout out to my boy Lali. It doesn't matter where you're at or where you're from, you're one group, right? Whereas the Southsiders are the same way. They could be straight enemigos from the streets, straight killing each other's people. When they get locked up, you will be busting spreads together, playing handball, and functioning as one group, right? The blacks are the same way when they get locked in. Now they got the more street gang banger mentality. So if one group gets off with one group, that's how they do it. They handle their politics internally. It's more based off of street gangs. Like, you ain't gonna be from 60s to go in there and just fucking chill with the Hoover. You're gonna have to earn your way into that, and vice versa. They're gonna have to get fades and catch fades and do all that till they feel it's sufficient enough to kick it. That's how that goes, right? But it's crazy because you'll have Nortenos and Merced or other cities, and this all happens in a lot of other cities too in Northern California, just so you know, that beef with these Crips. But if you get locked up, you're functioning on the same side of the yard with them. Like, that street beef stays there. But then if we get out tomorrow, it's on and cracking. It's just a trip on how politics and how the gangs work, man. And it makes you kind of wonder, like, what am I doing this for? Why am I involved? Because this day I can get off, but that day I can't, you know, or this guy right here is all bad. I want to move on him, but I got to ask direction, because if I just do it on my own accord, I better make sure it's done right, because if not, I'm going to be the one whacked behind it. It's just a lot of shit going on. But I wanted to do this video to tell you guys about a war that's been quietly fought for decades. See, it's not about just North and South. Blacks and North and blacks and South have also been getting the get down, man, going on. Now, lately, what I've noticed, and I know in the community on social media, there's a lot of people that try to cause division and tension between black and brown. I hate that shit, because we all have been through some shit. And I'm not going to say us more than them and them more than us. And there shouldn't be a them and a us, because we're all together, man, in the fucking things that we go through. And that includes the whites too. There's a lot of white people that are oppressed. I've been seeing, you know, we always talk about the oppression of black and brown, but incarcerated from a youth, the most oppressed people I ever seen were the whites. The Woods, brother. They always had short numbers, and there was always everybody either taking advantage of them, trying to, or doing so. It's just the facts. That's why there's some crazy Woods, man. They ain't going out like that. Anyways, just a video I wanted to put out there, man. Let me know what you guys think. Let me know about your interactions. Like I said, man, I've always had love for the black community and every other community, but that is a war that has been fought, at least in my city and other places. So to dispel rumors, no, black and brown are not together, united, and going against everyone. Unfortunately, that's the case. Sometimes they are at odds in that war, man, and it's wars that are being fought frivolously. Anyways, things are changing now, man. I'm seeing a lot of the black and brown communities coming together through rap music, through a lot of other different things, and I hope it continues. With that being said, thumbs up or thumbs down. Heavy's going to be the head that wears the crown. I'm going to continue to strive, struggle, and strive for what I truly believe in. Betterment of all people. Shout out to my boy Lali out there in Barrio Lakers. If you're ever in the Turlock, California area in that 209 Central Valley, go over there, man, to Turlock and get you some at the Barrio. Bang, bang.